The Civil Rights Movement arguably started during and after World War II. It was here where the first time white soldiers began to look at blacks as fellow Americans. A great example of this is the Tuskegee Airmen, who were liked and respected by the bomber pilots that they escorted. However, after the war, everything was the same old place, and after a series of lynchings, um, President Truman decided to take action, and in 1948, he desegregated the military. This was huge. After this event, it started to force whites into rethinking segregation. The spark that would ignite the powder keg, however, would come in 1955 when a woman named Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat to a white passenger on a bus. Parks was arrested, and what followed were massive boycotts of the Montgomery bus system. The court case that ultimately followed went all the way to the Supreme Court. This is where buses were finally desegregated. And shortly after this, a historic Supreme Court case also took place, um, or another one, I should say. It was known as Brown v. Board of Education. This case was about desegregation of schools. There was a tremendous amount of hype surrounding it, and ultimately, Brown v. Board was a landmark case which saw the use of extensive protesting and demonstrations to usher. Oh, come on. All right, you know what? No, I'm leaving this in there. Okay. Ultimately, Brown v. Board was a landmark case which saw the use of extensive protesting and demonstrations to usher such a thing into the Supreme Court. Schools were now no longer needing to wow, all right. I'm going to check myself to see if I have a stroke after this. Okay. No longer needing to separate white and black students. This was a big step in peaceful power grabbing, and while the road was still far from over, it was a big step. After the Brown v. Board's Supreme Court case, people and officials were still very reluctant to integrate schools. This was put to the test with the Little Rock Nine. The Nine were a group of students that would be the first African American students to test the Brown v. Board decision. This was certainly not warmly welcomed, and things got very hectic. On the first day of school, they had to be escorted into the school with the protection of army and police. And on one day alone, there were over 1,000 people protesting them and going to their school. This was not even an end to their problems, though, because the principal didn't like that they were there, and so he called in the National Guard. And for a while, they blocked the entrance to the school. However, President Eisenhower, yeah, this went all the way to the president, got convinced, or was able to convince the principal of the school to remove the National Guard, and they started going to school there successfully, although I can't imagine it wouldn't be distracting at all. And Up until that point, such a thing had never been done before. Now that the groundwork had been laid in some important areas, the civil rights movement began to see, even advancements in the Deep South. One of these instances was the Albany movement. The movement began with a student-formed committee called the SNCC, and they were going to try and end all forms of discrimination in the city, and they were starting with voting discrimination. Um, but they also protested other issues. The SNCC teamed up with the NAACP, and you know they did this to have more powerful protests. The movement began to fail, though, in November when over 500 people were jailed on a single day. And these groups, though, they were able to bring the attention of MLK, who, upon arriving, tried to rally the demonstrators. However, sadly, MLK was, which it's just amazing. They would arrest you for literally just standing there. Um, but anyway, they arrested MLK, and with all their leaders in prison, the movement began to fall apart. They made a deal with the city, however, where if MLK and the other leaders were released, they would obey the city's laws. This deal, though, was not upheld, and MLK remained jailed until he was bailed out. However, not all of these movements were unsuccessful. In fact, far from it. Martin Luther King, a beacon of hope and inspiration for the civil rights movement, led his famous March on Washington, which now lives in infamy. On August 28th, 1963, over 250,000 blacks and whites joined together to protest inequality and segregation in public commodities. Up until that point in time, there hasn't been a movement that came close to this up until here. Um, and it's arguable it's here where black and white people started to come together, and as he would say, not on the color of their skin, but on the content of their character. And the mass demonstrations ultimately stopped at the Lincoln Memorial, where Martin Luther King gave his infamous I Have a Dream speech. It was a huge success, and later it was even endorsed by President Kennedy.